The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Keanu Reeves, a familiar silhouette on his motorcycle, cruised down a less-travelled highway, a rare moment of anonymous peace. But the tranquility was shattered by a jarring sight ahead, a nondescript sedan pulling over and a car door opening. He watched, a knot forming in his stomach, as two figures, unmistakably teenagers, casually tossed a small, sputtering cardboard box towards the overgrown embankment. It was a fleeting, almost careless gesture, yet it radiated a chilling indifference that made Keanu's blood run cold. What had he just witnessed? And why did the casual cruelty of it all compel him to divert from his path, a silent vow forming to understand, to intervene? Keanu slowed, his mind racing. The car sped off, its occupants likely oblivious to the gravity of their actions, or, perhaps worse, entirely uncaring. He replayed the scene, the flick of a wrist, the tumble of the box, the rustle in the tall grass by the perilous roadside, where cars and trucks thundered past at high speeds. The image was stark, brutal. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that the box wasn't just trash. It contained something alive, something vulnerable. The sheer callousness of abandoning helpless creatures in such a dangerous, desolate spot ignited a quiet fury within him, a protective instinct kicking in. For a moment, he weighed his options. Confrontation on the highway was risky, and he wasn't looking for a public spectacle. His fame could complicate things, turn a rescue into a media circus, but then the faint, almost imperceptible sound, or perhaps the imagined sound, of a desperate meow reached him over the hum of his engine. That settled it. The potential for suffering far outweighed any personal inconvenience. He wasn't just a celebrity. He was a human being who couldn't turn a blind eye. This wasn't about him. It was about those lives discarded so thoughtlessly by the side of the road. With a new resolve, Keanu kicked his motorcycle back into gear, not in pursuit of vengeance, but of understanding, and perhaps justice. He kept a discreet distance from the departing sedan, his eyes alert, memorizing the license plate, noting the make and model. He needed to see where they were going, to understand the context of such an act. Were they just misguided kids? Was there a more sinister story? The questions multiplied as he followed, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the darkness of the deed he had witnessed. The chase, if one could call his careful tailing that, was tense. Keanu navigated traffic, ensuring he wasn't too close to arouse suspicion, yet not so far as to lose them. Each turn they made, each street they passed, he committed to memory. He wondered what their destination would reveal: a rundown apartment, a remote, uncared-for property. The possibilities were unsettling. He focused on the task, his earlier plans for a quiet ride completely forgotten, replaced by an urgent sense of purpose he couldn't ignore. He had to see this through, for the sake of whatever was in that box. To his surprise, the car eventually pulled into the driveway of a well-kept house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A neatly trimmed lawn, flower beds, a basketball hoop. It was the picture of middle-class normalcy. This dissonance was jarring. How could such an act of cruelty originate from a place that looked so ordinary, so respectable? The facade of domestic peace made the earlier scene by the highway feel even more grotesque. Keanu parked his bike a little down the street, hidden by a large oak tree, taking a moment to observe and collect his thoughts before making his approach. He removed his helmet, running a hand through his hair, his expression somber. The house exuded an air of calm that felt deeply incongruous with what he knew its younger occupants had done. He needed to be careful, to approach this situation with tact, but also with an unwavering firmness. This wasn't about shaming them publicly, but about confronting the behavior and ensuring the safety of the animals. He took a deep breath. The quiet neighborhood sounds, a distant lawnmower, children's laughter, a surreal backdrop to the serious task ahead of him. Walking towards the front door, each step felt heavy. The house was unremarkable, yet it now held a dark secret. He could see a light on in what looked like the living room. What kind of reception awaited him? Would they be defiant, scared? Would there be parents home? The uncertainty hung in the air as he reached the porch, his resolve solidifying. He was here now, and he wouldn't leave until he had answers, and more importantly, until he knew those kittens were safe from further harm. He raised his hand and knocked, the sound surprisingly loud in the stillness. The door opened, and one of the teens he'd seen by the highway stood there, a flicker of surprise, then confusion, crossing his face as he recognized the unexpected visitor. Keanu Reeves," the boy stammered. his eyes wide. Clearly this was the last person he expected to see on his doorstep. The initial shock, however, quickly morphed into a guarded wariness. There was a dawning awareness, a subtle shift in his posture that suggested he might be connecting this famous face with their recent illicit activity. Keanu's expression remained steady, unreadable. Keanu nodded, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. "We need to talk about what happened on the highway a little while ago," he stated, not aggressively, but with a directness that left no room for misunderstanding. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make accusations just yet. He wanted to see their reaction, to gauge their conscience, if any. He saw the other teen appear in the hallway behind the first, his face also registering shock and then a growing unease. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. The first teen immediately became defensive. "Highway? I don't know what you're talking about, man." His denial was quick, perhaps too quick. His eyes darted nervously towards his friend, a silent, panicked communication passing between them. The other teen remained silent, looking down, avoiding Keanu's gaze. It was the classic behavior of guilt. Keanu held his ground, his gaze unwavering. Just then, a deeper voice called out from inside. "Boys? Who is it?" And a man, tall and authoritative, appeared in the doorway, his eyes narrowing at the sight of a stranger talking to his sons. The man's presence instantly changed the dynamic. He had an air about him, a no-nonsense demeanor that Keanu recognized. It was the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, perhaps law enforcement. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm, his eyes appraising Keanu. The teenagers seemed to shrink slightly behind him, perhaps relieved to have their father there, or perhaps more fearful of his reaction than Keanu's. This was the cop dad from the whispered title, the irony of the situation not lost on Keanu. Keanu introduced himself, though it was clear the father also recognized him. "I'm sorry to bother you," Keanu began, his tone respectful but serious. "But I witnessed something concerning earlier. I saw your sons by the side of Highway 17. They left a box there." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air, watching the father's face for any sign of understanding or dawning horror. He chose his words carefully, sticking to the facts, to what he had personally seen, avoiding accusatory language for now. The father's brow furrowed. "A box. My sons." He looked from Keanu to his boys, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "What are you talking about? They've been home." He was clearly protective, his initial instinct to defend his children. "There must be some mistake. My boys wouldn't just leave a box on the highway." He looked at Keanu, perhaps wondering if this was some kind of strange celebrity prank or a misunderstanding. The teens remained silent, letting their father take the lead, their earlier bravado gone. Keanu maintained his calm demeanor, his gaze steady. "With all due respect, sir, there's no mistake. I saw them, I saw the car, and I saw them discard the box." He described the car again, the location, the time. He spoke with a quiet conviction that was hard to dismiss. He wasn't angry, not outwardly, but the seriousness of his purpose was evident. He was appealing to the father not just as a parent, but as someone who, given his likely profession, should understand the implications of cruelty and irresponsibility. The father listened, his expression slowly shifting from skepticism to a more troubled concern. He knew Keanu Reeves by reputation, a private, decent man, not one for baseless accusations or seeking an unnecessary spotlight. He glanced again at his sons, who were now pointedly avoiding his gaze, their faces pale. A seed of doubt was clearly planted. The man's training, his instincts as an officer of the law, likely began to pick up on the subtle cues of deception his sons were emitting, their body language screaming guilt. "Boys," the father said, his voice now losing its defensive edge, replaced by a sterner tone. "Is this true? What was in that box?" The question hung heavy in the air. The directness of it, coming from their father, seemed to stun them more than Keanu's initial approach. One of the teens swallowed hard, looking like he was about to speak, then stopped, glancing fearfully at his brother. The silence stretched, amplifying the tension. Keanu remained a quiet observer, allowing the family dynamic to play out. The pressure was clearly mounting. The father's gaze was intense, demanding an answer. Finally, the younger of the two teens cracked. It was Kittens, Dad," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mum said we couldn't keep them, and we didn't know what to do." The confession, though quiet, landed like a bombshell in the neat suburban living room. The excuse was flimsy, pathetic. and offered no real justification for their cruel method of disposal. The father's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, disbelief, then a deep, palpable anger and profound disappointment. He looked at his sons, then at Keanu, then back at his sons. "Kittens? You threw Kittens out by the highway?" His voice was low, but it seethed with a controlled fury that was more intimidating than any shouting. He was a cop, a man who upheld the law, and his own children had committed an act of animal cruelty, a crime in many places. The shame was evident on his face. Keanu watched the father, seeing the internal struggle. This was a man confronted with a terrible truth about his own children, a truth brought to his doorstep by a stranger, a celebrity no less. The father's professionalism, however, seemed to kick in. He took a deep breath, his expression hardening into one of resolve. "Where are they now? The Kittens?" he demanded of his sons. He wasn't just their father anymore. He was an officer confronting a serious offense. This was the critical turning point. The boys mumbled something about the box being near a specific mile marker. The father looked at Keanu. I need to go get them, assuming they're still—" He didn't finish the sentence. Keanu simply nodded. "I can show you where." I came back and carefully moved the box a little further from the road, hoping they'd be safe until I could figure out what to do. This addition, a quiet act of care Keanu hadn't mentioned before, seemed to impress the father, adding another layer to Keanu's unexpected intervention. Without another word to his sons, the father grabbed his keys. "You two, don't go anywhere. We will deal with this when I get back." His tone promised severe repercussions. He and Keanu left the house, a silent temporary alliance formed by a shared goal: the safety of the abandoned animals. The ride to the highway was mostly quiet, the father occasionally asking Keanu for more details, his mind clearly processing the implications of his son's actions and the uncomfortable situation he now found himself in. They found the box where Keanu had carefully placed it, nestled a bit deeper into the brush. Peeking inside, their hearts lifted. 4 tiny kittens, huddled together, scared but alive. They were meowing weakly, their eyes barely open. The relief was immense. The father, despite his anger at his sons, handled the box with a surprising gentleness, his expression softening as he looked at the vulnerable creatures. The immediate crisis had been averted, thanks to Keanu's refusal to look away. Back at the house, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken recriminations. The father placed the box of kittens carefully on the kitchen counter. He then turned to his sons, his face grim. "I am beyond disappointed," he began, his voice heavy. "What you did was cruel. It was irresponsible, and it was illegal. There is no excuse for this. None." He outlined the severity of their actions, not just the moral failing, but the potential legal consequences of animal abandonment and cruelty. The consequences he laid out were not light. The boys would be responsible for finding a proper, loving home for each kitten under his direct supervision. They would volunteer at the local animal shelter for the next 6 months, learning firsthand about animal welfare and the consequences of neglect. Furthermore, a portion of their allowance would be donated to the shelter. He was teaching them, a hard lesson but a necessary one, about responsibility, empathy, and the value of all living beings. Keanu observed, satisfied that justice in a constructive form was being served. He hadn't come to see the boys punished in a purely punitive way, but for them to understand the profound wrongness of their actions and to make amends. The father, despite the shock and shame, was handling it with integrity. He wasn't shielding his sons from the consequences. He was ensuring they faced them and learned from them. This cop dad was, in his own way, a hero in this scenario too. With the kittens now safe and a plan in place for their care and for the boys' re-education, Keanu felt his role was complete. He quietly prepared to leave, not wanting to intrude further on the family. The father stopped him at the door. "Mr. Reeves," he said, extending his hand, I can't thank you enough for what you did, for not just driving by. You taught my sons a lesson today that I, apparently, had failed to instill, and you handled this with incredible grace." Keanu simply shook his head. "They're just kids. Hopefully they'll learn. The kittens are what matters." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then, with the same quiet demeanor he'd arrived with, he was gone, disappearing into the evening as unassumingly as he had appeared. He sought no further accolades, no public recognition for his actions. His reward was the knowledge that those small, vulnerable lives were now safe, and that perhaps, just perhaps, 2 young men had been set on a better path. The incident left a lasting mark on everyone involved. For the father, It was a stark reminder that even in good homes, vigilance and constant reinforcement of values are necessary. He had to confront the uncomfortable truth that his sons were capable of such callousness, but also found a way to guide them towards redemption. He likely held a newfound respect for the quiet actor who had unexpectedly become an agent of moral reckoning on his doorstep, showing incredible integrity himself. For the teenagers, the experience was undoubtedly a harsh but transformative one. The shock of being confronted by a global celebrity, followed by the full weight of their father's disappointment and the tangible consequences of their actions, would not be easily forgotten. The hours spent at the animal shelter, caring for abandoned and mistreated animals, would hopefully instill in them the empathy that had been so starkly missing. It was a difficult lesson, but one that could shape their characters for the better, moving forward. And for Keanu, it was perhaps another affirmation of his deeply held belief in basic human decency and compassion. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He had simply acted on an instinct to protect the vulnerable, a trait many admired in him both on and off screen. This fictional encounter, though dramatic, highlights how one person's decision to stop, to care, to intervene can ripple outwards, preventing a tragedy and sparking an opportunity for growth and justice, even in the most unexpected circumstances. The story underscores a powerful truth, that acts of cruelty, no matter how casually committed, have consequences, and that standing up for those who cannot speak for themselves is a profound responsibility. It also shows that people, even those who make terrible mistakes, are capable of learning and change, especially when guided by strong moral examples. The image of Keanu Reeves, a man often associated with on-screen action, taking quiet, decisive action in a real-life, albeit fictionalized, moral dilemma, is both compelling and inspiring. The tale of the dumped kittens and the cop dad serves as a potent reminder that heroism isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes, it's about the courage to follow a conviction, to confront wrongdoing with calm determination, and to trust in the potential for good, even when faced with its opposite. It's about the quiet, unassuming individuals who choose to do the right thing, not for applause or recognition, but simply because it is the right thing to do, ensuring a better outcome for all involved. Ultimately, the incident by the highway and its resolution in the suburban home became a small, unwritten chapter in the lives of those involved, a testament to the unexpected intersections of lives and the powerful impact of empathy in action. The kittens, once symbols of callous disregard, became catalysts for change, their tiny lives saved by an observant motorcyclist and given a second chance through a father's difficult but just intervention, ensuring a positive and hopeful outcome from a disturbing beginning. This story, born from a dramatic what-if, touches upon the very real issues of animal welfare and the moral compass we all navigate. Keanu's imagined intervention here serves as a beacon, prompting us to consider our own responses to injustice. What would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe for more narratives that explore the everyday heroic, and consider supporting your local animal shelter. Every act of kindness, no matter how small it may seem, contributes to a more compassionate world.